He spent 7 years bullying me out of computer class. I spent 7 years building the software he begged me to fix. Let me tell you about the worst 45 minutes of my week for 3 consecutive years of middle and high school. Third period on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Computer applications class. Room 114, which smelled like warm electronics and the particular staleness of a room that never got enough fresh air because the windows had been painted shut sometime in the previous decade. 22 students, 12 computers along the walls. Mr. Hennessy at the front, who was a decent enough teacher but had the conflict avoidance instincts of someone who had been doing this job long enough to have stopped believing intervention changed anything. And Broderick Fane, who sat 2 seats to my left and made those 45 minutes the specific, targeted, grinding misery that only a certain kind of person knows how to manufacture and sustain. I need to tell you what kind of kid I was first because it matters. I was small for my age and I knew things about computers that the curriculum was not teaching, which in a middle school setting is not the advantage it sounds like. I had been building and breaking and rebuilding computers since I was 9 years old, starting with an ancient desktop my uncle had pulled from a dumpster behind his office building and given to me with the shrug of someone offloading junk. I had treated that machine like a puzzle that existed specifically for me. I learned from forums and from trial and error and from the particular stubbornness of a kid who does not have many other things going on and has found the one thing that makes the hours feel purposeful. By the time I hit 7th grade, I understood systems in a way that Mr. Hennessy did not, which I was careful never to make obvious because I was not an idiot, but which Broderick noticed anyway. Broderick noticed because Broderick was the kind of person whose primary social technology was identifying what other people were good at and finding ways to make that goodness a source of humiliation, rather than respect. He was not unintelligent. That is the thing. Stupid bullies are almost easier to deal with because their methods are blunt and predictable. Broderick was sharp and observant and had an instinct for the specific thing that would land, the comment that would get a laugh from the surrounding seats, the nickname that would stick, the moment when you were concentrating on something and most vulnerable to interruption. He called me Glitch for 2.5 years. Not because I made mistakes, because he knew I cared about doing things right and that having my competence undermined publicly was the version of this that would hurt most. He would wait until I was deep in something, some task that required focus, and then he would say something just loud enough for the surrounding seats to hear. Something about how I was probably talking to my only friends online. Something about how the computer was the only thing that would have me. Small things, calibrated things, delivered with the practiced casualness of someone who has learned to make cruelty look effortless. Mr. Hennessy heard some of it. He said Broderick's name in a warning tone on several occasions. Broderick would go quiet for a few minutes and then resume at a slightly lower volume. Nothing was ever documented. Nothing was ever escalated. It was the specific category of sustained low-level harassment that schools of that era were extraordinarily bad at addressing because it never rose to the threshold of undeniable incident and always stayed just below the level at which adults felt obligated to act decisively. I did not tell my parents. I am not entirely sure why. Partly because I did not want them to see me as someone who could not handle things. Partly because I had a sense, accurate as it turned out, that the telling would not change the thing and would add the additional layer of my parents' worry to an already unpleasant situation. I just endured it with the quiet, grinding patience of someone who has decided that endurance is the only tool available. I endured it for 3 years in that class and then for another 4 years of high school, during which Broderick and I moved in the same social ecosystem without being in the same classes, which meant the direct targeting reduced but the ambient low-level disdain continued in hallways and cafeterias, and the particular geography of a high school where everyone knows everyone and reputation is a thing that circulates whether you tend it or not. I graduated and left for a state university on a computer science scholarship, and I did not think about Broderick Fane for a long time. College was the first place I had ever been where being good at the thing I was good at was just straightforwardly good. No qualification needed. No social cost attached. I was in rooms full of people who cared about the same things I cared about and who competed through competence rather than through the kind of social maneuvering that had made the previous 6 years so exhausting. I thrived in a way that surprised even me, not because I had not believed I could, but because I had spent so long in an environment that treated my abilities as a liability that I had partly internalized that assessment without realizing it. I graduated with honors. I went to work for a mid-sized software company in Austin doing back-end development and discovered that I was not just good at it, but genuinely excellent at it. The kind of excellent that gets noticed and rewarded in environments where the work speaks for itself. I was promoted twice in 3 years. I started taking on architecture work, designing systems rather than just building them. I got recruited by a larger firm. I went. I got recruited again. I went again. By my late 20s, I was making very good money doing work I found genuinely interesting, which I understood was a combination that not everyone got to have and which I did not take for granted. I also, on my own time, had been building something. I had started it as a side project in my second year out of college, something I worked on in the evenings and on weekends, a piece of software for small and medium business inventory management. Not a glamorous category. Not the kind of thing that gets breathless coverage in technology publications. But I had spent enough time talking to small business owners through various community connections to understand that the existing tools in this space were either too expensive, too complicated, too inflexible, or some combination of all three. I thought I could build something better. I spent 4 years building it on the side before I was confident enough in it to start telling people it existed. Word of mouth in the small business community moves faster than people expect when something actually works. I had 100 users within 6 months of quietly launching, then 500. Then several thousand. I brought in a friend from college named Desiree to help with the business side because I knew my limitations and business development was one of them, and Desiree was extraordinary at it. We incorporated properly. We got a small amount of outside investment from people who looked at the numbers and found them convincing. I kept my day job for another 18 months until the point at which keeping it no longer made sense. By the time I was 31, I was running a software company with real revenue and a user base that had grown to a size that made the investment community pay attention. I had not thought about Broderick Fane in years. The message came through LinkedIn on a Wednesday afternoon. I almost did not see it because I am not someone who checks LinkedIn with any regularity. I only noticed it because Desiree had forwarded it to my email with a note that said, and I am quoting her exactly, "Do you know this person? He is asking about a partnership conversation." The message was from Broderick Fane. I stared at his name for a moment with a specific feeling of something surfacing from a place you had thought was settled. His profile told me what he had been doing. He had gone into retail after high school, worked his way into management, and eventually become the co-owner of a chain of 4 sporting goods stores across 2 states. Not a small operation. Real locations, real inventory, real staff. He had apparently been reasonably successful at it for a period of years. His message was professional and friendly in a way that contained no indication that he had any memory of who I was beyond a name he had found while searching for inventory management solutions. He said he had been looking at our software. He said the reviews were strong. He said he had a multi-location retail operation and was looking for something that could handle their complexity, and he would love to set up a call. I read the message 3 times. Then I forwarded it back to Desiree with a note that said, "Yes, I know him. Give me a few days before we respond." I want to be careful here about how I describe what I decided to do, because I have told this story to a few people, and the reactions split pretty cleanly between the people who think what I did was completely reasonable and the people who think I should have either ignored him entirely or just treated it like any other business inquiry. I did not ignore him, and I did not treat it like any other inquiry. What I did was respond warmly, set up the call, and spend the 2 weeks before the call doing something I had not done in years, which was thinking carefully and specifically about Broderick Fane and the 3 years of Tuesday and Thursday, 45-minute increments, and the word glitch, and the calibrated casualness of delivered cruelty, and Mr. Hennessy's warning tone that changed nothing. I was not planning revenge in the dramatic sense. I was not going to manufacture a reason to reject him or humiliate him, or do anything that was not entirely within the normal parameters of a business relationship. What I was planning was something quieter than that, and in some ways, more satisfying. I was planning to let him need me. Desiree knew the history by this point because I had told her. She listened to the whole thing with the focused attention she brings to everything, and then she said, "So what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to take the meeting. I want to take it seriously. I want to evaluate his business as a genuine prospect. And if it is a genuine prospect, then we will see." She looked at me for a moment. "Maya, are you going to be able to be objective about this?" I said, "I have been objective about things in worse conditions than this." She accepted that because it was true. The call was on a Thursday morning. Broderick appeared on screen, looking like a version of the person I remembered with 15 years of adult life layered on top. Broader. A little tired around the eyes. The confidence was still there, but it had a different quality to it. The confidence of someone who has built something real, rather than the confidence of someone who had not yet been tested by anything. He introduced himself. He told me about the stores. He was actually a reasonably good communicator in a business context, organized and specific, which I noted with the objectivity I had promised Desiree. He did not recognize me. I had not expected him to necessarily, but there was still something about the confirmation of it that required a moment of internal processing. I was a name he had found while searching for software. Whatever I had been to him in those 3 years occupied, apparently no memorable space. I asked him about his inventory challenges. He described them. They were real, and they were the exact category of problem our software was designed for. I asked follow-up questions. He answered them well. 15 minutes into the call, I could see clearly that his business was a genuine fit for our product. I said, "I want to be transparent with you about something." He said, "Sure, go ahead." "We went to the same school," I said. "Garfield Middle, and then Westbrook High. I was a year behind you." He looked at the screen for a moment. I watched him search his memory. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Webb. That's me, man." He laughed, surprised. "Small world. I did not even put that together from your name. You built this company?" I did. "That is genuinely impressive," and he seemed to mean it, which I had not fully anticipated. "I always knew you were good with computers. You were like the only kid in that class who actually knew what he was doing." I sat with that for a second. He always knew I was good with computers. 7 years of glitch and calibrated cruelty, and 45 minutes twice a week of manufactured misery, and what he carried from it was that I was good with computers. I said, "I remember those classes." Something moved across his face. Not a full recognition. More like the beginning of one. "Yeah," he said, and his voice had shifted slightly. "Yeah, I was not the greatest kid back then. Not an apology. Not a full reckoning. Just that, offered into the space between us with the brevity of someone who has thought about it enough to know it exists, but not enough to know what to do with it. I decided that was enough for now. I told him we would send over a full proposal. Desiree and I spent 2 days putting it together. It was a real proposal, thorough and accurate, priced correctly for his operation, structured in a way that reflected his actual needs. We did not inflate it. We did not manufacture complications. We built him the proposal his business deserved. We sent it on a Monday. He called me directly on Wednesday. He said he had gone through it carefully and he had some questions, and we spent an hour on the phone going through them, and by the end of the hour, he said he wanted to move forward. He said the pricing was fair, and the functionality was exactly what he had been looking for, and he appreciated that we had not tried to oversell him on features he did not need. I said I was glad it was a good fit. He said, "Can I ask you something kind of off topic?" I said, "Sure." "Did I give you a hard time back then? In school?" The question sat in the air between us for a moment. "Yes," I said. "You did." A pause. I figured. I was a pretty bad kid in a lot of ways. "I have thought about that more than people probably assume." I said, "I believe you." "I'm sorry," he said, genuinely. "That is not nothing to say. I know it does not fix anything, but I am." I thought about those 45 minutes. I thought about the word glitch. I thought about Mr. Hennessy's warning tone and the painted shut windows and the particular smell of warm electronics. I said, "I appreciate that," and I meant it. Not because it erased anything, but because I had spent 7 years building something that he needed, and I had evaluated his business fairly and offered him a real solution, and he had just apologized without being asked to, and without knowing whether the apology would cost him the contract. That was in some ways the most satisfying version of this that I could have scripted. Broderick has been a customer for 14 months. His 4 locations are running on our platform. He has referred 2 other business owners to us. He leaves detailed and useful feedback in our customer portal that Desiree has described as some of the most actionable notes we receive from any user. We are not friends. We are not going to be friends. But we are something professional and real and built on a foundation that is honest about what it is. He called me last month about an integration question and we sorted it out. And at the end of the call, he said, "You built something really good here, Marcus." I said, "Thank you." I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to build. He laughed. I think he understood what I meant. I did not feel the need to make it more explicit than that. I hung up and sat at my desk in the office I had built out of 7 years of evening and weekend hours, and I thought about room 114 and the painted shut windows and the 12 computers along the wall. And then I went back to work. Because the work was always the point. The work was always the whole point.